Mark Hettermann defines himself as a control guy who takes action when presented with a challenge. That life philosophy ended up earning Mark a 30-plus year career as a respected pilot and chief pilot with American Airlines. There, his advanced aviation skills, along with his innate business insights, actually changed the role of Americans' chief pilots across the nation, and propelled Mark to the forefront of the aviation world on 9/11.
I did parallel careers for 20 years, so once I got hired with the airline, I stayed in the Guard and Reserve.
Because you had to make that commitment, or you chose to?
I chose to.
Why?
One, because the fighter flying was so good. I knew that I could never recapture that in any other aviation walk of life. You had to cherish it, relish it, and I did.
So 20 years you did that? That's a lot of demand on your time.
Yes, and family time.
Were you married?
I was married, 28 years old. We had our first child. The demands were considerable, and really eventually ended up causing me to retire after 20 years rather than pursuing a command position.
Would you have liked to have done that?
No, really. I mean, the decision I made was to be with my family. They had really sacrificed enough with my time being divided, and it was time for me to commit to them. It turned out that I found out through American Airlines flying the vice president at the time through on a campaign stop, January '74. American Airlines plane was on our ramp at Richmond, and I talked to the pilots, and they said, we're hiring. So I got my application in right away, waited 3 or 4 months, and there was a good friend in the Guard unit who got the call to come for an interview who had far less experience than I did, which triggered me to say, okay, I've waited long enough. So I bought a ticket to LaGuardia, where they did the interviewing at the time on the East Coast for American. And I put on my suit, and I flew up to LaGuardia, and I walked in to a room, an admin room, snuck around some security guards. But I had to get into the American administrative offices and find where they were doing this hiring, because I had no guidance, and nor was I invited. And I walked in the door, I'll never forget it, there was a room full of guys in 3-piece suits, all with tight haircuts and with their resumes in their hands. And I had to walk past them, scope the area out, and I could see that big room narrowed down into a hallway, and I went down the hallway, and there was a desk with Gail Sheehy at it. Gail was the administrator for the HR office at the time of American Airlines. And Gail looked up and said, can I help you? And I said, well, quickly blurted out my story. And it probably wasn't my presentation as much as Gail Sheehy's heart that said, you know what? I can't fit you in this morning. You saw what's out there. And she said, I will try to get you in the door in the afternoon. No guarantees. I came back and I waited, and it came to be about 4:15. And nobody was left in the waiting room except me, and I heard a door open, and a guy say, well, Gail, that's it for the day. And my heart sank quickly, and then Gail said, hey, and I forget the guy's name, but let's call him Al. Al, we got one more guy out there. And Al said, I didn't have him on my list. He said, well, he's a reschedule. In the door with Al, and the rest was...
Whatever possessed you to think that you could make that work?
It was just one of those things that you had to do. I'm a control guy. I see a challenge. I see something that needs to be solved in my life, and I try to solve it.
Are you now an American Airlines pilot?
I received a late April date, which was then canceled and then rescheduled in July 2nd.
And when that happens, do you have to go through flight training with them?
Very advanced flight training and advanced simulators. You were not being hired as a pilot, you were being hired as a systems manager.
The guy behind him.
So they went into a depth of knowledge on the systems that you really hadn't even gone into in the military.
Did you ever feel like it was a waste of your time because you were a pilot, you weren't an engineer?
It was a challenge.
How long did you deal with that challenge?
That depended completely on seniority, because you went in You went off of training, onto the line, and you had to wait for a co-pilot position to open up.
And when in the process did you move from engineer to co-pilot and eventually to pilot?
Maybe a year from engineer to co-pilot. I quickly made captain.
So what year were you made captain?
It was early 80s.
And then you flew for how many years as the captain?
Probably was 10 years before I went into flight management.
Let's talk about the transition from pilot to administration. You don't impress me as a guy who would enjoy being in an office. I mean, the way you talk about flying has a certain spark to you and a passion. And to take that and put it in an office setting doesn't seem to me like it would be necessarily your cup of tea.
When I took the job, I took it only as I presented myself to the panel that was interviewing for the chief pilot position in Washington. I presented a different model for a chief pilot, and one that was much more proactive than what we had before. There was not a whole lot of personnel management that needed to take place with an airline pilot. I saw that. I saw my dad manage his pilots at United Airlines.
So your dad was a chief pilot.
United called it flight managers. It was a specific airport job. You had a base, a particular airport, and a schedule based around the flight attendants and pilots that were at that base.
And you were the administrator of all the flying personnel for your airline at that airport.
At that airport. And to give you an idea of what computers did, even at that time, this was the early 90s, my dad, when he did the job, had 13 other flight managers that worked with him, and he had 35 pilots assigned to him. As I took over the chief pilot job in Washington, we grew to have 700 pilots there. So the chain of management was 1 to 700 in 1992. In 1980, it was 1 to 35.
Is that an unfair realignment?
No, it wasn't. It's just where we had come technologically.
So when you go to apply for this job and you say to them, I'll do this work, but only with a new model, and here's the model I'm presenting, how was it different? What was your model change?
They're hiring me as very expensively as a captain off the line, so they're taking my body and putting me in a job. And to be an administrator, to talk to people about days off or sick leave, that really didn't present a value proposition in my mind to the airline. What I was valuable for, and what I saw the future pilot management team valuable for, is the insights that they had gained into the industry from the years of flying captain through their experience level. So not only have they gained insights towards the flying of the airplane, but they gained insights into baggage handling, into the airport operations, into the agent's job, into a whole lot of different jobs that could then be leveraged into a manager that could be a participant in the operations, to interact with the FAA, to interact with the airport management, to interact with the airline management at the airport, more so than just sitting in an office and administratively managing the records, the sick leave, the days off. Instead of sitting at the desk, if you're out in the terminal, talking to agents, even just talking with the team at the station, or you're interacting on a snow day in the airport operations and at the airport manager's office, out there on the runways, taking a look at what the conditions are and trying to, by so doing, enhance not only the safety proposition for that particular day, but also the efficiency proposition. So my thought was, you didn't need to be in the office. I had an administrator that could do all that. The lady who worked for me, who was a manager in her own right. So as I stepped in the door, I delegated most of what had been the chief pilot's job to my administrator, and took on the role of being out there. Now, there were challenges there because the other managers at the airport were content with seeing the chief pilot stay in his office.
Right.
So the question was, how do you positively fit yourself in with a role that wasn't there before, as advisor, somebody that the general manager at the airport from the airline would trust to come to and say, what do you think? So that didn't happen overnight, and the insertion had to be very subtle. You had to be collaborative.